And hello to you, and welcome to the Richard Nicholls podcast, the personal development podcast series that's here to help inspire, educate, and motivate you to be the best you can be. I'm psychotherapist Richard Nicholls, and this is episode 168. It's titled Dealing with Crazy Thoughts. And if you're ready, we'll start the show. So, regularly, clients will tell me that they've had bizarre thoughts and are a bit freaked out by them, and I think it's worth everyone knowing about this so that you don't think the same way about your thoughts, because what they say is that they might, out of nowhere, suddenly start having thoughts about hurting someone, maybe killing someone even, maybe hurting or killing themselves, or maybe even snogging their boss or their cousin. Yeah, it's weird. We do have weird thoughts, all of us, and we don't tend to talk about it, outside of the therapy room anyway. So I want to put your mind at rest, that if you have some crazy thoughts, you need to remember that they're just thoughts. They're not reality. Thinking about pushing someone in front of a bus doesn't mean you're a potential murderer. It just means that you have a brain and that it works. And I know if they get a bit crazy, these thoughts, you might sometimes think that there's something wrong with you, but believe me, there isn't. It's perfectly normal to have weird thoughts like this. No matter how dangerous they are still just thoughts, which in themselves are actually completely harmless. Thoughts do nothing, but they have the potential to frighten you. Our thoughts have the potential to grab our attention and make us question our own sanity, maybe even make you feel as if they're controlling you a little bit. Your thoughts might not make you act out the harmful behaviour, but they might make you walk away from something or someone because you don't trust yourself. It's not quite as severe, but I remember my wife's granddad always used to say when anyone in the family had a baby that he would wait until they were older to play with them. He'd say, "I'll wait till they're big enough to fight me," he'd say. Because as a retired miner with an odd fascination for hoarding bits of old angle iron in his shed, he didn't trust himself to be gentle. So he didn't learn that he could be. Now, it's not unusual to have a fear of hurting a baby. That's completely normal. And it's not unusual for our brain to focus on the things that we fear. It's what it does. So don't be surprised if the strangest things pop into your mind. Even, and I've heard this, even how you would dispose of your dead wife if you were to suddenly become a murderer. I know it's freaky, it's an extreme thought, and that's why people don't talk about it. And that's why I am. So forgive me if this does seem a bit unusual a topic, but we're a pretty unusual species, to be honest. But don't let it stop you from doing anything. Don't let your thoughts of knocking over a cyclist in your car stop you from driving. Don't let your thoughts about dropping a baby stop you from having a cuddle with one. Just recognise that they are thoughts, maybe even fears. Acknowledge them and move on from them. That way they won't become your focus of attention, which, by trying not to think about something, often does happen. The more you try not to think about something, the more importance your brain places on it, and it backfires. I've talked about that before. I'm sure I have recently, actually. Might have been in a Patreon-only episode earlier in the year, maybe, but I have spoken about it before, even outside of the Patreon-only stuff. So if you're a long-time listener, then you probably already know. The secret to dealing with intrusive thoughts is to accept them as thoughts and move on with something else. I guess it's worth adding in here that someone with obsessive-compulsive disorder might find it harder to move on from their thoughts, and that's why the thoughts then often turn into obsessive behaviours as a distraction from the thoughts. But there doesn't need to be a behaviour for it to be OCD. Obsessive thinking is a symptom of OCD. It's not all about washing your hands 20 times a day, not at all. But the belief that thoughts are more important than they actually are, or that having the thought is the same as doing it for real, might point towards OCD. So if it's taken over your life for longer than an hour at a time, or needs some sort of ritual that you need to compulsively repeat in order to try and settle your mind, then maybe think about seeing a psychotherapist. But I'll say it again, as it's quite important. Having obsessive thoughts, which is sometimes called having pure O or purely obsessional OCD, is just in your mind, not in any ritualistic behaviour. And so it's often overlooked because it's hidden. And people can sometimes go years without getting help or even opening up to friends and family about it, but it's treatable. It might mean exposure therapy, gently introducing something that triggers the thoughts into your daily life. If the obsessive thoughts are about you harming someone, and every time you see a knife you have an hour of obsessive thinking about stabbing your best friend, then silly as it sounds, done with a psychotherapist or clinical psychologist to help you with this, to make sure you're doing it, in the right way for you, because it might sound a bit daft to do this, but carrying around a little plastic knife with you in your bag or your jacket pocket or whatever can actually help people. It sounds daft, I know, but you begin to trust yourself around it because it's always there. Your brain learns that it's okay, and then you'd move on to a pair of scissors, maybe, but don't go jumping straight into it with a flipping kitchen knife in your handbag. That'll make things worse. But sometimes you can't use exposure therapy for these sorts of things because it's about guilt or thinking that you're a bad person or you're not good enough for your spouse or your partner. Again, if this is in your head for an hour every day, see someone. But this sort of thing only affects maybe 1 in 50 or 60 people. So although it's possible that you or someone you know has it to that extreme level, for it to become a disorder, OCD, it's still rare. But what isn't rare is having these crazy sorts of thoughts in the first place, because that's not a sign of OCD. It's not a sign of some sort of personality disorder or mental illness. People with OCD, or personality disorders, or mental illness, they may have those thoughts too, but in the same way that having an ingrown toenail might make you limp, it doesn't mean you've got cerebral palsy. It's just an ingrown toenail. Same with bizarre thoughts, just even more common than an ingrown toenail, especially with new parents. Thoughts about harming your baby are quite common when you're a new parent. It's probably your biggest fear, and the brain is smart. Even if it sounds stupid for it to do it, but our brain makes us focus on the things that we associate with pain, so as to try and prevent it from happening. And the brain does have the same processes for emotional pain as physical pain. It doesn't really know the difference. So it would be strange if these things didn't pop into our heads. And it doesn't mean that you've developed postpartum OCD just because you check on your baby breathing in the night. If it's every hour in the night, or you're waking the baby up to make sure it's still alive, then I'd ask some serious questions. But having the thought of your baby being hurt or even dying is quite normal. It's just horrible. And because it's a horrible thought, it can become a bigger focus than is fair. Even if it is OCD, it doesn't increase the chances of your baby being hurt just because you think about it, though. It is hard to dismiss those sorts of thoughts, though, obviously, but if it is a part of OCD, then it can be helpful to think about the words that come up into your head as if the voice belongs to the OCD rather than belonging to you. That can help. If you or someone you know, though, already has the belief that it's not their voice in their head anyway, then that can be a sign of something a little sinister. Obviously, if your wife says, "I keep hearing the devil in my head telling me to hurt the baby," then she needs help. Today. Take the day off. Go to accident and emergency. Now. Because that could be a sign of a psychotic episode, which is when fact and fiction get completely blurred and people lose track of reality. And all the psychotherapy in the world won't change that. Not on its own, anyway. Psychotherapy comes after the episode has faded. And first and foremost in that extreme is psychiatric medication. So, in the absence of schizophrenia, how do we handle our freaky thoughts? Well, it can sometimes be useful to think of them a little like an oversensitive car alarm. Sure, it's useful to have a system that alerts you if there's something that needs your attention, but your car alarm shouldn't go off just because there's somebody walking down the street that looks a bit shifty. And it can be useful to think of intrusive thoughts as being a bit like an overly sensitive car alarm. If you know that your car has an alarm that goes off unnecessarily when there's nothing wrong, then it's easier to accept it and ignore it, even if it's screaming at you. The same with your thoughts. Just because they're screaming at you, it doesn't mean that there's something wrong. Maybe say to yourself, "Oh, my broken alarm is telling me I could push that old woman in front of that bus." Yes, you could, but that doesn't mean you will. Remember, thinking is not the same as doing. Just because you think it doesn't make it real. You can think about eating Marmite with a spoon straight out of the jar all day long, and it doesn't mean you like Marmite. And so in the same way, you can think your crazy thought all day long and it doesn't mean you'll do it. It's a bit like junk mail. I don't know about you, but I'm always getting emails through that are desperate for my attention from spammers and hackers, and I spend as much time hitting the delete key as anything else some days. I can't make them go away, but I can filter through them and ignore them. And unfortunately, I can't have a spam filter on my emails because I get so many emails from people talking about things like erectile dysfunction, for example. That's a common issue. If I've got a spam filter, that's just going to stick it somewhere else. So I did have a spam filter, but I've had to disable it lately because emails just weren't getting through that were genuine. So I have to look through them myself. I have to know that some things are there in my face but need to be deleted or ignored. And that's the same with real mail. In with all the bills and bank statements, there's usually a leaflet from Farm Foods that I put to one side ready to recycle. For those of you not in the UK, by the way, Farm Foods isn't as wholesome or as fresh as it sounds. Quoting Basil Fawlty, I'm sure those peas were fresh before they were frozen. But just because I get sent these things doesn't mean I have to examine them. The same with any junk we get through the post. We get so used to seeing them that we know automatically that they don't need our attention, and so we ignore them. But it takes practice. Maybe knowing the difference between the letter that says, "Do not ignore this, you've won a timeshare holiday home," and "Do not ignore this, your council tax is overdue." Sometimes you have to ignore what's being thrown at you. Like last week, I was... Shall I tell you this one? I'm going to have to now, aren't I? I was standing in my bathroom, having a wet shave, listening to a podcast on my iPad, when my mobile rang, and the caller ID said it was from North Shields. Well, I don't know anyone in North Shields, I don't think. I don't have any clients there either, so it's probably just someone trying to sell me something. So I chose to ignore it. My ringtone, by the way, is the James Bond theme tune. I know, I'm a child. One day I'll grow up, just not quite yet. So my hands are covered in shaving foam, so I don't want to touch my phone to cancel the call, and I can't touch my iPad to pause the podcast either, so I've got to stand at my sink, trying to listen to the No Such Thing as a Fish folk, whilst also trying to ignore Monty Norman and John Barry's Bond theme buzzing away trying to distract me. And it was hard. Of course it was. Much as I like the Bond theme, it's really stood the test of time, actually. It was still intrusive when I was actually trying to focus on something else. If you think of your intrusive thoughts as a bit like that, it can be easier to accept them as just something trying to get your attention. Something that you can choose to ignore. So, let me know how you get on, and if enough of you think that you'd like me to go into a bit more detail, go into a bit of a deep dive about this, then there'll probably be a Patreon-only episode at some point in the future all about this. I've got to do another Patreon episode now, because it's not only is it the first of the month, but it's Monday! And if you didn't already know... I hope you already did, but I do make Patreon-only episodes on a Monday morning. That's going to be about gratitude and appreciation, taking that into a bit of a deep dive as well for everybody. And there's going to be a hypnosis exercise about that. But if you all want a specific hypnosis track about dealing with these sorts of intrusive thoughts, I'll make one. It's not inappropriate. I can soon put something together. And if you want to become a patron of the podcast and you're not already, then take a look at my website, richardnicholls.net. There's links to the Patreon account that handle the finance side of it. It's only $5 a month, and you get an episode every Monday morning, and access to some different hypnosis chill-out tracks as well. Even if you just want to join just for a month and then cancel it a month later, I don't mind, especially actually as it's the first of the month. Join now and you've got it for the whole month because Patreon take their payment on the 1st. Although, if you're listening to this towards the end of the month and you want to do that, you can, because I'll still keep the previous ones on there until to the 1st of the month anyway. So as long as you download them or listen to them before the 1st, you'll still have access to the previous months. You just have to pay again on the 1st. Anyway, that's enough of the hard sell for one day. Have a super duper April, pod fans, and I'll speak to you again very soon. Take care, folks. Bye.